Three Watches, number 12. Quote, "And now I'll show unto you a parable, that you may know my will concerning the redemption of Zion." End of quote. I realize that it must seem incredible that God's plan for the redemption of Israel would involve bringing his servants back from the dead. Perhaps that's why he calls it a strange act. For evidence number 12 that the marvelous work is to begin at a later time than the foundation work that was laid when the church was restored in 1830, I'm going to reference the parable of the olive trees in section 101. I previously mentioned section 103 that reveals that Joseph Smith is the servant of the vineyard that's going to lead the saints out of bondage. However, today I'm going to focus on the actual parable in section 101 that section 103 makes reference to. The Lord actually uses a parable to explain how he's going to redeem Zion. In the parable, the servants of the Lord begin building a tower or temple, and then they begin arguing and getting distracted. Eventually, the enemy comes and tears down the tower before it's completed. At a later time, the Lord has the servant gather up the strength of his house and go back to redeem Zion. Although some D&C commentaries claim that the parable is referring to the Jackson County Temple and that Zion's camp was the fulfillment of the parable, which is really absurd since there never started construction on the Jackson County Temple, and Zion's camp was unsuccessful in their attempt to redeem Zion. In a discourse given in Nauvoo, Joseph Smith reveals that the parable of the redemption of Zion was referring to Nauvoo. See Nauvoo Discourses Building the Zion of the Lord. Although some LDS historical revisionists are trying to rewrite history and tell us that the Nauvoo Temple was completed, there's indisputable proof that it was never finished. In fact, Brigham Young mentions it in his personal diary as he's leaving Nauvoo, that he hopes the saints can return and finish the temple someday. Read the parable in verses 43 through 60 very closely. It's incredible. It proves that the marvelous work, which includes the redemption of Zion, was to be a later work than the LDS foundation work in the 1830s. God's going to have his servants, who hold the keys of the kingdom, and also the dispensation of the last times and the dispensation of the fullness of times, return in the third watch to gather the strength of the house, his house, and return to redeem Zion. Here are the comments. Carl Skousen Freestone, D.C. said, "I read the verses carefully, and it says that the residue will return with the servant and destroy the tower that the Lord's enemies have erected. Does this tower refer to the new Nauvoo temple that's recently been built? It sounds like it does." Watcher says, "Carl, I prefer not to comment on this part of the parable at this time, other than to acknowledge that you are paying attention and are very perceptive." LDS Anarchy said, "Oh, come on now, Watcher, let's open up. It's the last days after all. Just who is that man of sin sitting in the temple of God showing himself that he's God, and which temple is it?" Smiley face.